So first off, I'd like to start with a quote by Rita Felsky, who states that there's something troubling, both ethically and politically, about a view who would deny any genuine insight or agency to those with whom one disagrees. And I think this captures the sentiment within my paper today and underpins my arguments and thoughts that I'll try to convey. The deconstructionist turn, although useful to break down concepts and ideas, often leaves us with no place to go, and perhaps leaves us with a zealous commitment to the act of negation. The term genderqueer began to be commonly used at the turn of the 21st century by youth who feel that their gender identities and or gender expressions do not correspond to the gender assigned to them at birth, but who do not want to transition to the opposite gender, characterising themselves as neither female nor male, as both, as somewhere in between. Genderqueers challenge and negate binary constructions of gender and traditional images of trans people. Sometimes genderqueers use a wide variety of terms as an identity to describe themselves. These may include trans boy, boy dyke, third gender, bigendered, multigendered, androgyne and gender bender. Or sometimes they refuse to attach a label to their presentations at all, feeling that no one word or phrase can adequately capture the complexities of how they experience their gender. In 2002, in Genderqueer Voices from Beyond the Sexual Binary, Wilkins saw genderqueering as the next major civil rights cause, a political movement centred upon being able to express oneself in ways that do not generate political, social, medical, legal and personal reprimand. A movement that dismantles the worth of some gender expressions over others. Of course, this is no small undertaking, and wrought with contradictions and tensions. How are we to claim positions within society with an already established gender hierarchy, when the potential positions that we strive for are unintelligible to either the self or others? Whilst I perceive genderqueer to have influenced the movement of how we can present our genders queerly, I think that there's a rift between what is happening on the ground in trans queer spaces and how many academics and researchers have theorised this political endeavour. For instance, at a queer event that took place in the north of England in 2007, the attempt, and it was called Get Bent, the attempt was to provide spaces to fuse politics, culture and sex in a spirit of inventive playfulness and offer an important DIY alternative to other groups in the transgender political sphere. In a call for participants, it stated, "We introduce this open forum to discuss and debate how people approach their own body image and self-image and view their own physicality in a positive way. This is part of a large project aiming to empower, liberate and inspire all kinds of people to reclaim, love and look after their bodies and physicality. Using visual and performing arts, creative writing and holistic healthy living techniques. A founding principle of this project is to actively challenge unrealistic pressures and negative representations of gender normative perfect bodies and messages promoting body fascism surrounding us in the 21st century." They continue, "Everyone is welcome to get involved, and this is a special invite to anyone who feels invisible, marginalised and unrepresented, such as people who self-identify as transgender or intersex or undefined, non-heterosexual, people with disabilities, people with eating disorders, people who self-harm, and people who use body modification techniques such as tattoos, piercings, bindings, scarification, causetry and drag." Here the focus is on the disruption of the established social order's representations of certain bodies having intrinsic negative meanings. This may, for example, also include challenging the social structure and power relations in everybody's everyday lives. However, these queer spaces often do not pit trans people against genderqueers, but try to encourage dialogues that engender new ways of thinking about surviving in and challenging the world, rather than negating the ways gender and sexual minorities try to live. The focus then becomes about desire and choice in using the technologies available to actualise livable bodily aesthetics in the widest possible sense, or to keep or modify the body if so sought. A similar debate and rift has arisen between feminists. Embodiment and bodily aesthetics have been theorised in different feminist and non-feminist approaches, but most of the work often ends up as dichotomous moralistic polemics based on understandings about what constitutes good and bad practices. Feminist and non-feminist work drawing on post-structuralist analyses fall into problematic dichotomies such as docile versus subversive action, good versus bad politics, mind and body, and right and wrong bodies. The most vociferous by far has erupted in the cosmetic surgery debate, which has been on the one hand concerned with women as docile and been duped by patriarchal beauty and cosmetic technological industries, and on the other focusing on calling for these technologies to be used as a site of resistance to normative femininity and masculinity, and to destabilise beauty ideals of white Western cultures. For instance, Morgan and Balsamo suggest that aesthetic procedures may be used to destabilise current hierarchies of femininity and masculinity and their prominent positions within patriarchal structures. Both advocate using technologies as a critical feminist tool, on the one hand to create ugliness as an intentional failing and as a benchmark of value, and on the other to show the cultural constructions of the body in general and what constitutes beauty in particular. This, they propose, will show the body and beauty to be patriarchal laws rather than being determined by universal laws of natural beauty. Balsamo and Morgan's position contends that the natural body has been dramatically refashioned through the application of new technologies of corporeality. The merger of the biological with the technological has infiltrated the imagination of Western culture, where the technological human has become a familiar figuration of the subject of postmodernity. This merger relies on a reconceptualization of the human body as a techno-body, a boundary figure belonging simultaneously to at least two previously incompatible systems of meaning, the organic natural and the technological cultural. Academic papers on trans and queer genders seem too to be divisive in similar ways. A number of debates spring to mind: Namas, Prosser and Butler, and a number of others. Genderqueer, as opposed to transsexual body projects, which I see being pitted against each other in many academic arguments, are heralded as subversive and acting out against the oppressive gender system. Genderqueer people here seem to have unrestrained choice to be who they want to be. Transsexuals, however, are often represented as the docile recipients of a medical discourse of distress, a failing because they are constrained by a wish to pass as a member of a particular gender. I will argue that this genderqueer transsexual distinction is not, in fact, an easy one to draw, and moreover, the dichotomy becomes divisive and unproductive for theorising and understanding the politics surrounding the diverse phenomenology of people, all of whom could be regarded at some point or other genderqueer. I suggest then that theorising about these dichotomous positions is failing too. It is unclear, for example, why claiming a genderqueer position is in fact genderqueer. It's also unclear why claiming a transsexual position is normative. As Wilkins suggests, all these things we think we know in the world, the most fundamental is our bodies. She goes on to state that these knowledges are couched in notions of bodies having failed, or the ways we have of knowing about them have failed, and by extension the way we have of knowing about all bodies and many other things have failed as well. So in this paper I'd like to address this notion of failing theories and failing politics, and look towards a potential way of exploring gender generally and genderqueer and transgender particularly. I propose that we can embark upon an exploration of these aspects of lived world failings through an engagement with embodiment. What are paramount for me are the connections and continuities between the aesthetic body, style and desire, in which the notion of the aesthetic cannot be set apart from the rest of life. Eagleton asserts that the body operates as the site of aesthetics, hence the phenomenological features of aesthetic experience and judgment are central to such bodily experiences. As Halberstam has noted, the contemporary landscape of gender in the United States and European genderqueer communities is immensely more complicated than the opposition between real transsexuals and playful performative queers. Whilst not talking about gender per se, in Sartre's existentialist discourse around authenticity, he suggests people who have made their choices based on pre-established codes of civil life, such as the medico-legal gender binary, would make an inauthentic identification. Many genderqueer analyses would inevitably agree with Sartre on this point. Established codes of civil life, as exemplified in the UK's Gender Recognition Act, which is the law that allows trans people to change their birth certificate gender marker from one to the other, would be another point in case, and would also be seen as encompassing an inauthentic relationship. Thus, for Sartre, the structural discourses of medicine and law interpolate the individual into a false sense of their own recognition. The decision that people make to be included in civil society, such as a change of birth certificate, are made in bad faith. On this sense, bad faith is the primary obstacle to authenticity. Genderqueer people, in this sense, may be put on the other side of the inauthenticity debate, because they refuse to be constrained by the gender binary. In a Sartrean sense, the pre-established codes of male and female in the Gender Recognition Act, and because of the law's binary logic, and people who apply to be recognised in this way are failing because the law is enticing them to become inauthentic subjects, whilst foreclosing the possibility of their authentic genderqueerness. This also suggests that people who do claim gender recognition are in a battle to overcome their social inauthenticity, which, according to McNay's reading of Zizek, will never happen because the person is too complex to be captured by one set of identifications. However, as McNay argues, this assumes that the ideological power of the real that people feel they are emotionally tied to, or the authenticity, has an abstract logic of its own, and therefore cannot account for embodied social practices and progressive resistance to a system that is continuously implicated in biopolitical struggles. Now, in our case here, transsexuals may be recognised to embody a symbolic critique of the binary sex-gender system, which contests the authenticity of the original assignment of their bodies and of their sex bodies particularly. Transsexuals who both actualise their desired bodies and who do not actualise normative bodies through surgery, hormones and other technologies undermine the once dogmatic sex-gender binary, which is based on a corresponding body and gender presentation. Contestation of the symbolic understanding of natural and normative bodies also undermines the notion that trans people's so-called bad faith in civil codes, such as the Gender Recognition Act, cannot overcome and challenge the social conditions of its production. As McNay contends, the possibilities and scope to react in new social contexts is always evident because of an individual's agency and subjectivity, organised through regulated liberties. The Gender Recognition Act provides new social contexts that trans people may find themselves in now and may go some way in redressing what it can mean to identify with the term transsexual and the terms male and female. Sartre's dichotomous assertion that civil life suppresses authentic subjects and the desire to maintain distance from those structures and call them into question, to change them, is more authentic, is exactly what is witnessed through political praxes in relation to the possibilities of transsexual embodiment. However, Sally Hines argues that the Gender Recognition Act is unable to recognise the diversity of new trans masculinities and femininities, as they are variously constructed and experienced. Hence, rather than broadening the realm of citizenship in relation to gender diversity, the Act works to reinforce a normative gender model. Whilst this is true in relation to binary sex categories, male and female, this assumes a universality of the concepts male and female. There are also other bodily possibilities. Transsexuals have helped to rewrite the civil codes themselves and thus are at the forefront of social change rather than the passive recipients of social structures and oppressive social practices. The reification of transsexuality through the regulatory practices of the Gender Recognition Act establishes a diverse set of social relations to the body. For example, in my research alongside a number of other trans people, Gregory was able to, and Clifford was unsure that he wanted to, have body modification surgery, hormones and technologies to actualise their transitions. Gregory's decision not to have technological interventions were due to physical impairments he sustained during childbirth. He was given a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, giving him the required paperwork that is required by the Gender Recognition Panel to approve his new birth certificate. Gregory's bodily aesthetic does illustrate that the GRA, or the Gender Recognition Act, recognises new trans masculinities within law. For Clifford, he suggests that he is swaying more towards it, transitioning, and yes, probably I would. It's a huge decision because it's obviously for a lifetime. And I ask, what kinds of things are you debating about with yourself? Well, I suppose it's about, is it right for me? Is it right or wrong for me? Not for other people, but for me. Is this something I should fight against? Is this something that I should accept? Or should I just learn to accept? Have you researched into hormones and other trans men's lives? Well, I belong to the group and there are a lot of people, so I have spoken to them. I think a lot of people find that there are a range of different ideas. Some people feel that they have to have every possible option before they'll be happy. For me, if I do one thing, will that be fine for a little while? If it's not, then you will have to go another step. I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction with phalloplasty, for instance. And it's sad that people do not have enough information and feel that they have to go for that option. There are others that think that it's too risky and it's not satisfactory. So there's a range, I suppose. You'll do what's right for you. For Clifford, his decision for technological changes were not based on the once dogmatic idea that men and women must have a penis and vagina respectively, but what was right for him. For the participants in this research, the discourse of authenticity was key to their social recognition, claims of embodiment and self-understanding within the structural parameters of medico-legal relations. Authenticity was qualified in various ways in relation to the medico-legal system. Rather than essentializing authenticity, participants agentically use it as an ontological desire within lived relations. A concept to secure treatment if so desired, and as a concept to open up the field of possibilities surrounding their embodiment. Therefore, an ontology of desire is an aesthetic force that is endless and rhizomatic rather than adhering to an ontology of being in any static sense. My illustration here, I hope, serves to show that there are no strict positions for transsexuals to adhere to. I take this position because it assumes that all people have agency within constraints, allowing us to ask questions concerning the tactics employed in attaining, assessing and subverting bodily aesthetics, which allows us to develop a fuller, more complex conceptualization of gender and bodily aesthetic desires. This enables me to move away from the dichotomous and theoretically limited analyses of gender embodiment and bodily aesthetics by situating authentic desires through the notion of agency within constraints. It's useful here to draw on some aspects of Susan Stryker's critical queer theory to call for an ethics of difference. For Stryker, there is no right bodies per se, just bodies of difference. While Stryker has permitted a distance from the restraints of her birth-assigned sex through the technology imparted by medical experts and legal recognition, her social body is not awarded the same social recognition and value as gender-normative people. She writes, "Like the monster, I am too often perceived as less than fully human due to the means of my embodiment. My exclusion from human community feels a deep and abiding rage in me that I direct against the conditions in which I must struggle to exist." Through her writing, Stryker attempts to subvert the standards of the normative body, if only momentarily, through her transgender rage and her position as an academic. Stryker's monstrous body, she states, assumes an affinity with Mary Shelley's Frankensteinian monster as a participant in Doctor's fantasies about mastering the limits of gendered life. However, the social hierarchies through which bodies are judged tasteful and beautiful are not disrupted, even though Stryker's body adheres aesthetically. Stryker's body is politically invigorated through the subversive action of transitioning, but continues to be cast by others as monstrous. Both the Shelleyan monster and Stryker's monstrously queer body stand in resistance to a stylized transsexual body of academic theorizing and the gendered heterosexual order that doctors aspire to. Stryker argues, as we rise up from the operating tables of our rebirth, we transsexuals are something more than the creatures our makers intended us to be. Though medical techniques for sex reassignment are capable of crafting bodies that satisfy the visual and morphological criteria that generate naturalness as their effect, transsexual embodiment, like the embodiment of the monster, places its subject in an inassimilable, antagonistic queer relationship to a nature in which it must necessarily exist. Stryker attempts a resurrection and revaluation of the monstrous body that she hopes will become a politically lucrative way of disrupting naturalized ordering of bodies. She wishes further to open up the possibilities surrounding gender, sexualities and styles, following Sandy Stone's groundbreaking call to arms, which summoned more multifaceted auto and biographical accounts of transsexualism to be articulated. Stryker also desires the truthful specificity of transsexual embodiment and intentionality to emerge. The articulations will be in the fashion of novel modes of self-expression through bodies of difference. Genderqueering that uses post-structuralist approaches to emphasize the structure agency aspects of autonomy, beauty, technologies and their bodies as lived experiences are important. However, I've illustrated elsewhere that much of this work is a critique of trans people who want to identify with a particular gender identity, and is restrictive and can only show how some bodies are duped into conforming to the structural guidelines which constitute normative bodily aesthetics. Theorized through the negative paradigm, social discourses which support social structures that correspondingly affect the aesthetic criteria of social, sexual and phenomenological body images situate the gender normative subject as pervaded by ideology and subsumed by symbolic social norms. This, I suggest, forecloses agency for body normative as well as queer people. For example, there is no way of knowing when ideology begins to act on the desires of people. Therefore, I would like to suggest that, that conclusions about particular identity or naming of such a thing are too neat. To claim an identity, whether that might be by gender, trans boy or so on, delineates to a certain degree what that constitutes. The rift involving conceptualizations of transsexuals and genderqueers, and the bridge I conceive of their connections, is desire. I suggest that desire both disrupts stale patterns and formulate new creations. What is more, to posit that transsexuals do not have desire, intentionality and agency, as do genderqueer people, halts questions about how transsexuals navigate and help rewrite the material and ideological constraints within the social fields of society, medicine, law, and so on, which is evident, for example, in the narratives of Clifford and Gregory that I've just illustrated, and in the Gender Recognition Act 2004 and the changing landscape of transsexual recognition in numerous other nation states. A point in case is Argentina. Self-determination, according to some trans advocates, is another way of making claims for those wanting technological interventions to change gender beyond a psychiatric frame. Transgender Europe situates self-determination within a human rights discourse. In this literature, it emphasises that every trans person has a right to actualise their transition as far as they wish it should go. This approach is gaining weight in the anti-pathologisation movement, perhaps because of governments such as the Argentinian government that recently legislated on, arguably, the most progressive trans recognition law in the world. The law allows people to alter their gender on official documents without first having to receive a psychiatric diagnosis or surgery. In the New York Times Online, Katrina Kazis, a Stanford University professor of bioethics, said that Argentina's new law will not only give you the right to self-identify, but for those who want medical intervention, it requires public and private providers to cover procedures for self-actualization. Whether that will pan out in reality is another thing, but the self-determination frame challenges healthcare professionals to work towards supporting trans people's health intervention by reducing the psychopathological framework in which trans people are viewed. In effect, these claims remove the need for psychiatric diagnosis of gender identity disorder. These human rights groups understand transsexuality and other transgender identities as expressions of sexual diversity, moving beyond dualist notions of trans. As one prominent group argues, attempting to diagnose diversity is, they say, a pointless exercise. I think there's a greater scope for a broader inclusive understanding of trans people and genderqueer differences if we refuse to judge good genderqueer and bad transsexual practices and instead incorporate phenomenological notions of difference as both an ethical and methodological necessity. Thus, starting from the standpoint is valuable because not only does it allow us to recognise difference within broader categories of trans men, trans women and genderqueer, but it also allows us to understand that the various habituses of everybody have historically divergent aspects that generatively constrain diverse embodied practices. Therefore, it's my contention that we have a duty as producers of knowledge to no longer pit one group against the other in the fight to dismantle gender hierarchies, but to collude against a system that renders all minority genders as failing. And just my final point here, following Wilkins, I want to suggest that it's bad enough to render them transsexuals silent, even worse to make them speak a lie. Worse yet, if speaking the lie erases them. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.